Well, hi, good afternoon, and welcome to this is actually the fifth of my cruise news updates live. So if you're joining me, thank you very, very much for joining me. So this is the very fifth one that I've done. It's a sweltering hot day here in London. And so hopefully there won't be too much noise from the outside, but I had to have some of the windows open. So first of all, what I thought I would do is run through a couple of things before we get stuck into the actual live stream and everything that keeps and it's going to happen. So there are three key ways that you can watch the live stream. You can either, of course, join live and watch it absolutely live right here on YouTube. Secondly, you can watch it afterwards and you can watch it on the channel. And I keep it up for around about a week, so you can actually dive into that and watch it. Or thirdly, what you can actually do is listen to it, should I say, rather, as a podcast. And if you are a big podcast fan, if you take a look on any of your favorite podcast apps, like Apple Podcast or Spotify or whatever, just look for Essential Cruise Tips and you will find, the podcast if you want to listen to it afterwards. Of course, the great thing if you join live is you get a chance to join the debate. So we'll have some discussion. You get a chance to ask questions. So I'm going to give you some updates, going to give you some news, and very importantly, the chance to ask anything you want. What I'm going to do over time is probably make these live streams much more focused on different topics. But at the moment, most people want to ask questions around the fast-changing world that we're currently in. So that's what we're probably going to focus on. So no specific theme, ask anything that you want to do. As people are joining, as we're getting ready to go, I thought I would just highlight to you what videos have come out this week, what the topics are, and what Sunday's video will be. So let's just take a look at that for those of you who had a chance to perhaps catch up. On Tuesday, the first video I brought out was this one, cruising updates, cruising restarts, some of the setbacks, and I'll touch on those in the live stream as well. And the second thing I did, which came out yesterday, Thursday, as we're doing the live stream, was taking a look at what cruise ships are doing. There's actually 6 things that cruise ships are currently up to while there are no passengers on board. So what are these empty cruise ships doing? Where are they? And so take a look at that. And then on Sunday, the video coming out will be looking at the best cruise lines and best cruises for travelers over the age of 40. So welcome to the live stream again. And so first of all, what I'm going to do as we get up and running, and again, remember, put your comments into the chat and I will try and answer as many of those as I possibly can. I can already see people joining, saying, I can see KB's joining again, Hetty's joining again, which is fantastic. And I've got some questions coming from Neil, from Gary, hi, from another Gary in the USA, and some questions about the CDC. So I will come on and answer all of those questions, absolutely. So please, if you have any thoughts about the news or you have any questions, pop those in the live stream. So that's the advantage. If you are watching this afterwards or perhaps on a podcast, you don't get a chance to answer live questions, so consider joining live. So let's just take a look at some of the cruise news and updates that I wanted to touch on before we get into the Q&A. And I touched on some of these in the video that came out on Tuesday, but these are the bunch of things I want to talk about. I always get pointing the wrong way, this way, that way. It's because it's in reverse. Anyway, so I want to talk about cancellations. I want to talk about Spain. I want to talk about borders. I want to talk about fleets and crew. One of the most significant things that happened, in fact, it happened a week ago today, was CLIA, the Cruise Line Association. They issued a statement saying that all members of CLIA were going to cancel cruises through the 15th of September. So what we saw during the course of this week is all of the major cruise lines who hadn't already cancelled. So we saw Carnival cancelling to the end of September. We saw Royal Caribbean until that deadline of the 15th. Some of the cruise lines like Cunard, P&O, based out of the UK, had already cancelled through into kind of October time. So we saw a whole raft of cancellations. And one of the critical things linked to that is the CDC. And there's a question actually, which is a good setup, which I will come to, and I'll actually answer that question. And I'll talk a bit about the CDC. So we're seeing pretty much cancellations being pushed out. And of course, what's fairly significant about that timing is it really is looking at Caribbean cruising, even if they are allowed to start in that time period, sort of starting as we sort of head into the peak Caribbean season, which starts sort of towards the end of the hurricane season. But basically, we're not seeing cruises starting up. There's a few pockets of cruising starting up. We're seeing, as I think I spoke about last time, in Norway, there are 3 significant things happening in Norway. First of all, Hurtigruten has now 5 ships ready to roll, which are going to be sailing for Norwegian passengers only. They have also got approval from the Norwegian government to bring non-Norwegian citizens up to Norway. And what's really important about that is they're initially talking about taking German passengers, but they're not going to be able to get off on land. So although they can collect them in a foreign port, they can do kayaking, they can do water-based activities, but they can't step on land. But they're getting more and more approvals from that. Seadream are also running. Iceland have now said that cruises can run around Iceland, but people going into Iceland do have to have either a test at the airport, which you have to pay for, or alternatively, you have to quarantine for 14 days. The second thing which sort of builds on that, so I'm going to talk about some of the bad news first, and then we'll put some rays of sunshine. The second thing that happened in the course of the last week is Spain. Now, Spain are starting to open their borders to land-based travelers, but what they announced is, as they lifted that, is cruise ships are banned from Spanish waters, and they are going to be banned indefinitely. We don't know when that's going to be lifting. We also saw during the course of the week, New Zealand extending the ban. Australia had already done it. Very importantly with Australia is, I think it was yesterday or the day before, the tourism minister spoke about international travel in and out of Australia only starting up in 2021. And Qantas over the last few days has spoken about laying off 20% of their crew and staff, and they're really saying they're probably not going to get up into international travel to June, July time. So actually movement of people around is looking not that great. There's also been a lot of reports about the EU not letting US citizens come in. So there's a proposal which still hasn't been agreed, so it's still circulating, which talks about the United States, Russia, and China not being allowed to come into the EU as those borders open. So the EU, for those who don't know, they have a thing called the Schengen zone. So basically, when you come into the EU, you can move between all those countries that are in the Schengen zone. So places like the UK were never in the Schengen zone. Of course, we've left the UK, we've left the EU now, but we weren't part of the Schengen zone, but we normally would follow a lot of those rules. Switzerland, I think, is actually in the Schengen zone, although it's not part of the EU. So basically, they're talking about lifting those border controls so people can move between the EU for the summer holidays, but they're talking about banning US people coming in. So that's obviously put a bit of a dampener for US people that were hoping to come river cruising, because some of the river cruising has started up. And it's going to be interesting to see, and I haven't seen anything yet from those cruise lines that rely very heavily on US passengers. So if you look at UniWorld, Avalon, Emerald, they rely a lot on Australians, Americans, and so it looks like they're not going to be allowed in. We will know in the course of next week, because they have to make a decision before the 1st of July. So people moving around is looking more of an issue. So we're seeing, as I think it spoke last time, around more and more cruise lines starting to look at local cruises for kind of local passengers so they can circumvent a lot of that. Let's talk a little bit about fleets. Some big things happening. Carnival have started to dispose of ships. They've got rid of 6 already. And what a lot of people had assumed is these ships were being sold. However, we discovered yesterday that one of the Costa ships, because we didn't know what the ships were, one of the Costa ships that has been disposed of is actually going to be scrapped. It's only 23 years old. So normally what would happen is, as ships got older, they would be sold on to smaller cruise lines, and then eventually, many, many years down the line. But it looks like even relatively new ships are being scrapped. So we're seeing cruise lines starting to really slash back their fleets. And as I think I mentioned last time, the cruise lines are talking about how do they also, come back to service. And they've already said it's going to be a slow, steady process. They're not going to get everything singing and dancing. That's always my reminder for people when you're booking for a cruise ahead of time. Until we know exactly when they start, be very cautious, because they've already made it clear that all ships and itineraries are not going to come up and running separate even to that border issue. So they're already talking about that, holding back how many ships come on, but they're starting to get rid of ships. We haven't heard anything from Royal Caribbean or Norwegian yet. But linked to that, though, we've seen whole cruise lines starting to disappear. So Pullmantur, which was a joint venture with Royal Caribbean and a Spanish company, I think I mentioned in my video that we had picked up from CRUISE that they were starting to strip a lot of the valuables off that ship. They've announced basically that they're restructuring under Spanish law, which basically means they're closing Pullmantur down. We've seen cruise and maritime voyages in the UK struggling to find money. So we're seeing some of those smaller cruise lines that used to pick up some of those smaller ships looking more and more risky. So we're seeing some contraction in fleets, and I think we're going to see more and more of that. So I'll keep an eye on that. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of updates is crew. I saw some data this week that says that still, about 20, 30,000 crew are still on ships that haven't been repatriated. For those of you who don't know, what happened is a lot of the ships were in the US, and the CDC basically clamped down and said you couldn't take crew off the ship, embark them on land, put them on commercial craft. So the cruise lines have started to repatriate crew with their own ships. In Manila Bay, for example, when I last counted, I counted 19, and I spoke in my video this week about 19 ships are in Manila Bay with crew and offloading crew. Somebody sent me a message this morning saying they had looked on an app. There's an app which is called Marine Traffic. Great if you want to know where your favorite cruise line is. And they had counted 29 cruise ships in Manila Bay taking crew back. One of the most interesting things that happened this week is Scarlet Lady, the new Virgin Voyages ship, which kind of launched at the worst time ever, has never been in service, has never had a paying passenger on, been in Miami. It set sail back for Europe 2 days ago. They expect to get back to Europe on July the 6th to basically bring crew back. So they have never sailed. They're heading back to Europe to offload crew. We don't know if they're going to be doing any other work on the ship at all linked to some of the new protocols or whatever. But we're seeing still lots and lots of crew, still heading back home. And that what's very interesting, and I mentioned it last time, is all the messages I've seen are still about crew leaving the ship. I haven't seen a lot about crew coming back, and I keep an eye out for that. I think I mentioned last time, there's a very good Facebook group called Crew-Center, which is run by crew, and that's a very good place of early information around stuff that's going on. So like the Pullmantur stuff, for example, picked up on that and then saw it verified. So those are some of the key updates and news, and it's a very, very fast changing world. So I will definitely keep an eye on the news, and I'll cover them in the weekly Friday update, and as needed, I'll also do a video updating and commenting on some of those key changes. So let's take a look in at some of the questions that people have been asking. And bear in mind, if you have any comments on the updates, you have any comments on the news, you have any questions, pop them into the live stream, and I will try and bring as many of those up, even if it's just an opinion you've got or a question that you've got. So let's take a scroll back. And as I mentioned, thanks to everybody who's asked questions. I'll try and go through these more less in line, but I'll also try and keep an eye on them and try and group some of the key ones that come up together. So let's start with Neil. Neil Carey asked, "Hi Gary, have you any insights into how the river cruise lines are managing COVID compliance? Not easy on these narrowboats, surely. First time to the Rhone in August." Neil, it's very interesting on river cruising because I think we probably do have a pretty good sense of what is happening because we've already seen a couple of river cruises running. So we've seen the Nico cruises have been running cruises in the Rhine. They're expanding into other rivers, mostly focusing on German passengers. It's a German-speaking line, although they are talking about running some English-speaking cruises now as borders start to open. Secondly, Arosa started sailing in Douro. I think that cruise is still underway. It might be heading back tomorrow, I think. And they have a whole bunch. I can't remember. I think there's 5 or 6 ships running river cruising. And we've also seen a very detailed document from Crossy Europe, which are, in terms of the number of rivers and the number of ships, the biggest river cruising company. It's a privately owned company by the Schmitter family. So what we've seen is some very, very clear things on what are happening. So I'll run through what they are. And these will evolve, of course, as the situation evolves and guidance evolves in Europe, I think. First thing we're seeing is social distancing. And what they've done by social distancing is they are running with fewer passengers. So all of them have gone with fewer passengers. I think if I'm right in saying Nico might have been as low as half initially, but they all have fewer passengers on, which of course means that they have more space to spread out. So your point is, they're relatively small ships, they have more space to spread out. So that's the one thing they've done. Secondly, what they've also done to enable social distancing is they have built in more dining times. So as you know, if you don't know, being a first-time river cruiser, what tends to happen is you have a single seating in one dining room. Very few ships have more than one dining option. And so you normally have one seating, you might have an open seating, it's normally kind of open seating, normally a buffet breakfast, a buffet lunch often, and a served dinner. Most of them have got rid of the buffets altogether, or it's a served buffet for breakfast and lunch. What they've then done, though, is they've staggered timing. So they used to just have one seating. So what those cruise lines have done is they now have 2 seating times, so they can basically have everyone spread out in the dining room. So then you have half the people in the dining room, because the dining rooms can cater for, if there's say 100 passengers. Most river cruises have about 100 passengers. So they will have done it so there's only 50 passengers at a time. They also have one-way systems on board. So people can walk in more of a one-way system, and I haven't seen that in practice, and I haven't seen exactly. I've seen some areas on some pictures where they've shown sort of in the reception area. There's a one-way system with arrows on the floor. Masks are a part of the process. Mostly, though, masks have been required at briefing. So when all the 100 passengers are in the more enclosed space, in the dining room or wherever, in the bar lounge area, they've had masks there. They've often asked people to wear masks when they're in the corridor, and they required people to wear masks out on excursions. A lot of that is because that is actually required in some of the places they're cruising to anyway. So masks are a requirement. So it's following those things. Also, what's interesting, although I'm not sure if it's going to be an ongoing thing, is what Nico did is they actually had a doctor on board. River cruising ships don't have a medical center because they're basically cruising on. They actually had a medical person on board. And basically across Europe have very, very simple protocols. Obviously, there's all the usual cleaning and all that kind of enhanced cleaning process. So that's basically what we've seen happen for river cruising. So hopefully, Neil, that answers your question. And it'll be very interesting to see if you do get to do that cruise in August and who's that with. But certainly some of it is starting up, and it depends which country you're coming from. So Gary is asking a question. We have an Oceania cruise to the Med scheduled for November. It's not cancelled yet. Assuming it does, would you reschedule for the spring or wait? So it's in terms of November, it's hard to know, of course, whether Europe will open or not. One of the things that I've been looking at when it comes to ocean cruising is looking at what the countries in Europe have done with large gatherings, so theaters and big stadiums and things like that, and they have been pretty cautious on that. So that's going to be interesting to see whether that aligns or not. If it does get cancelled, I would wait. I would so first of all, what I would do, as you implying this, I would wait until Oceania cancels, because that's going to give you a more flexibility in terms of taking the future cruise credit bonus, or of course taking the cash if you want. Now, Royal Caribbean, which is Oceania's part of the group, in my experience so far, has been one of the quickest in terms of actually doing refunds so far. But and I haven't had to have a refund from Oceania, but the Royal Caribbean group has been pretty good. But what the Royal Caribbean group are doing is they're allowing much more flexibility, and they're pushing that flexibility. So I would hold on and wait. I would also wait, to be honest, before booking and locking down, because we don't yet know what ports are going to open, which ships are going to be up and running. So I would actually wait, because you might find the itinerary you're booking is not the one you want. So if Spain, for example, is still not letting cruise ships in, or only certain Italian ports are letting ships in, or parts of France on, or depending on where your Med cruise goes, I would wait until there's much more certainty, ports have agreed to open, and it's been signed off before booking. Because otherwise you might book a cruise where they change the ports dramatically and you're not that happy with the ports, but there's nothing you can do because cruise lines can change it. So I would just wait until you know exactly what the itinerary is going to be. So I would wait. And the big decision point, of course, is going to come when you have to pay your final balance, which for October, you're probably going to have to pay relatively soon. here's a question about the CDC. I did mention I was going to talk about the CDC. So the JM129 says, are talks going on between the CDC and CLIA that are making any progress in developing health guidelines going forward? So just to clarify, in case people don't know, before, because someone asked me this on my channel this week, why don't the cruise lines just start sailing? Why they wait? Why don't they just grow a pair and do it? The reason is they can't. So in the US CDC has to sign off. So the Center for Disease Control has to sign off before cruises can sail. In the UK, there's the same thing. It's Public Health England. You've got the CDC equivalent in the EU. So they do have to sign off before cruises can run. So there was a lot of criticism this week about the CDC not engaging with the cruise lines and that there'd only been one formal meeting. What actually happened this week is the CDC issued a statement, which they issued and was run on Cruise Critic this week. In fact, I saw it yesterday, where they were a little bit defensive. And what they said they're doing is they have been focusing a lot on crew repatriation and the process for crew repatriation. They have been looking at and reviewing proposals from the cruise lines, but certainly there doesn't seem to have been a lot of public contact, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of formal meetings. They did quote the number of man hours they've been working on the whole issue, but again, really focused to repatriating crew, and that does still seem to be part of their focus. So the fact that the Cruise Line Association sort of preempted the no-sail order, I think, was also telling. They wanted to take, or be seen to take, the initiative. Over the next 2 to 3 weeks, we will know much more the answer to this question. The no-sail order expires on the 24th of July, unless it is renewed. So the next week or two, as we head into July next week, this is when we will get the real answer to this question. How far down the line are the CDC and how are they engaging? Because they will have to make some sort of statement. Certainly the stuff I've seen, I'm reading, listening to the various interviews, you don't get the sense there's a very aggressive contact between the two, and it's more kind of bubbling on in the background. So let's take a look. Tina Lee 2042. Hello from Central Florida. Hello from Central Florida. Hello, Florida. We have Florida-like weather here, I think, at the moment. Do you think the upsurge of cases in our state will impact the return to sailing, since so many originate here? And that sort of links, Tina, I think, to the previous question. I don't know the answer to that, but it does feel to me quite likely, just logically quite likely, as we see the second wave. So if we take a look physically what happened, so one of the river cruise lines in the United States, which was I think it was the American Cruise Line, or American River Cruise Line, were due to start sailing this week, I think it was, or maybe it was next week. And they had to pull their sailing because there was a resurgence of cases, and the governor basically wouldn't allow them to sail where previously they had been allowed to sail. So you do get a sense that clearly if there is this increase in cases, it's probably going to cause some issues in terms of disallowing it, because all of the statements you've seen from the CDC, whether it's the CDC in Europe, whether it's even in the UK, I've seen it from the CDC in the US, they have all spoken about the issue that they still see cruise ships as a risk of spread of the virus. So it does feel to me like it is going to have an impact on the thinking. In one regard, also it's going to, in terms of filling the ships, will be an issue, because at the moment, UK, Europe aren't allowed to even fly in the US, because when the whole outbreak started, that was not allowed, and that is still ongoing. I mean, I'm due to be in the US in October, and really what I'm seeing is they're saying it's probably unlikely we're going to be allowed to come in, even if cruises, assuming that everything was fine and cruises running. So I think it's definitely psychologically is likely to, and probably practically going to have an option. It's going to have an influence. Another point I want to pick up, because this was a very interesting one. I didn't cover it in the update because it was more speculation than fact. But Gary Bruxfort, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Gary, said, what do you think about limiting those that leave the ship in port to cruise line tours. No wandering around the port on self-guided tour or shopping. Gary, this is an issue that I've been wondering about a lot and trying to see if there's been any sense of that. So there's two things that I think are important in terms of your question. One of which is in all of the various protocols that the cruise lines had issued. So Norwegian Cruise Line issued quite a big document. Virgin also, which I think I touched on last week, they issued a big protocol. And also looking at the river cruise lines, all of them have spoken about they would be working with the providers of their cruise line to follow the same sort of protocols that they required on board the ship. So there was already a sense that, there was going to be a lot of concern or focus on what happens on ports are very controlled. Then there was an interview this week, which I saw on Cruise Radio. So the blog Cruise Radio was also on their podcast. And I'm trying to remember now whether it was I think it was the Bahamian tourism minister who spoke about the belief that cruise lines would not allow passengers to walk out and basically stroll to themselves. And what he was saying, this is in the context of the recovery of tourism in the Bahamas, was saying that he was warning stall holders and independent taxi drivers and things that actually, even when cruise lines do return, there's likely to be a lot of challenges, because he believes that the cruise lines are going to require passengers to stay within the bubble, if you like, within their bubble, within their approved cruise excursions. So Gary, I think it's really interesting. I've been waiting as well to see whether this is going to be the case, because if you just think about as ports open, they're going to want to make sure that there's some security if people are coming on land, that people will follow whatever protocols are there, whether it's mask, whether it's hygiene, whatever it is. So it feels to me that that's going to be the case. What was very interesting with the Norwegian protocol is they spoke a lot about screening people, doing medical screenings, temperature screenings every time someone came back from an excursion. Which, of course, even if someone caught something in a port, they're not going to have symptoms in temperature that quickly. But you get a sense that the cruise lines are doing it. So I would not be surprised, based on those initial indications, that either you're going to be strongly encouraged to go on approved cruise line excursions, or you're going to get a seal of approval, or there may be limitations. The other thing, Gary, which I think is an interesting one, and this came up in an article in the Telegraph in the UK, and it's also applicable with something that Pullmantur are doing, is in the Telegraph there was an interview with the CEO or the head of Saga Cruises, which is a UK-based line. They focus mostly on the 50-plus traveller, and they sail out of the UK. So every single one of their sailings sails out of the UK, no matter what time of the year it is. So they all kind of drive to, so they start and end in the UK. Even if they go very far afield, they start and end in the UK. So it's a drive to cruise market. Now, most of their passengers tend to be, although they target of 50, tend to be 60s, 70s, and so on. But what he was talking about is they're actually looking at two things. One of which they're looking at trying to negotiate with the UK government, only UK passengers. So 99.99999% of their passengers are UK. So, getting cruising open up with only UK passengers, so following all the UK rules and whatever, and either one, cruising but calling it no ports, so sea days only, very sea ship-based focus, or only calling at UK ports, so either UK ports only, where again it's all controlled because it's within the ecosystem, if you like, the same rules, the same healthcare system, whatever, and or doing no ports at all. So we saw the same thing I mentioned earlier on, if you were in the stream earlier, where Hurtigruten got approval from Norway. They got approval from the German government to basically say, we'll take people up to Norway, which is actually very scenic, so lots to do, and we'll only do stuff on the water. So you're not actually doing excursions at all. So it's effectively a sea day only, but kind of activities on the ocean. And Pullmantur are negotiating with the French government to start selling in the middle of July, and they already are selling those itineraries to French people, out of French ports to French ports only. So it's the ecosystem. So actually, the excursions become less of an issue because they're within the country. I think once you start moving countries, that becomes a big issue. So the cruise lines seem to be solving it one way, saying we'll only call on ports where all our passengers come from, or some kind of bubble. So that's a really interesting one. I think definitely something that I'm really interested to keep an eye on and to keep watch. That was a very interesting question. James is asking a question. When cruising restarts, won't the experience be greatly diminished from what we're accustomed to, and will it be worth it? And the answer to that, I guess, James, is we don't yet know, because we don't know exactly what the experience is going to be. I think looking at the early river cruises, they did feel quite alien, to your point. So I would personally, if I was allowed to go on, I would love to have gone on one, but more because I'd love to be able to document and video and report back what the experience was, and also talk a little bit about what you're talking about. Is it a good experience or a bad experience? Do you really want to be heading out with an experience where you've got masks and limited dining, or controls on excursions? So we don't yet know. I think what the cruise lines understand is they're going to have to offer a good experience. So I think we're going to find a marrying between being allowed to cruise and getting the right cruise experience, which is why some of the things I think they're talking about, those beautiful scenic cruising around Norway, you could probably create a great experience. But I think that's going to be a big issue. And lots of people at the moment are focusing on when it could start selling. What are the rules and regulations? Will I have to have testing? Will I have to have masks? What are the rules? What's the hygiene? But not a lot of people yet are asking this question, James. And that's another one that I think I really want to work out on. So Paul is asking a question about river cruising. So California, hi from California. Hi to California. We were just cancelled for our 2nd of September on the Azamara. Interesting enough, all the Azamara ships are in Scotland now. All of them are in Scotland. 2 of them were in Scotland, and the 3rd one joined them this week as well. So all your ships are up there. Do I have an opportunity to join a Rhine River cruise in March? Do you think our chances are good to actually sail? So I assume this will be March next year. I would have thought by March something's going to be sorted out. I'm optimistic. I think by next year people would have figured out how we're going to travel and not travel, what the regulations are going to be for traveling and moving between borders. I think that's highly likely. March is very early to be starting river cruising. The river cruising season does start kicking in about March, but really starts much more in April. And I would actually suggest that April's a better time than March. Not that many river cruises starting in March. March can be still pretty miserable weather-wise, quite grey and stuff. So it's not the most beautiful scenic part. Once you get into April, the weather's much better. So, but if you've got an opportunity and it's a great opportunity, you might want to look at that. But if you can nudge it into April, I would try and nudge it into April, just because you're probably going to have a better experience. It tends to be brighter weather. You've got more chance of blue skies, a little bit warmer. So I would try and focus on April in terms of river cruising in that regard, if you possibly can. And a lot of people saying, I think it's going to be fine by next year. People asking questions like, do you think, Elizabeth's asking, what about Bermuda in June? And other people saying, I do think it's going to be figured out. I think it's, I have cruises for this year, which I don't know if they happen. I'm even starting to worry about January. I've had lots of questions about people booked in January. Nicholas is asking a question about the celebrity revolution. So let me just explain that for people who don't know. So basically what happened is Celebrity were trying to move their fleet forward in terms of design, features, restaurants, all that kind of stuff, and really modernize the ships. So they brought out the Edge class. So they have 3 classes of ships. They have the Millennium class, they have the Solstice class, and now they have the Edge class ships. And the Edge class are very, very different. They have very different hull shape. They have the magic carpet, which moves up and down the side of the ship, which is largely designed actually as a big platform so they can tender people off ships when you're tendering really, really quickly. It's very, very efficient, big tenders. So it's really good for getting people off the ship. And then when it's sailing, it becomes a restaurant stuff. And introduced lots of kind of design. They worked with new designers like Kelly Hoppen, who's a well-known UK-based designer, various designers, to make the ship much more modern, much more contemporary, to make it kind of appeal to a younger target, I guess. So what they've done is, once they brought out Edge, they moved that into Apex, which they've taken the delivery of. It hasn't any passengers on. They then started a massive program, and I'm trying to remember, I think it's about $500 million, where they were basically revolutionizing all of their ships. And they'd started on the program. They'd done a couple of them, some of the Millennium class ships. They'd done They've done some of the Solstice class ships, like the Solstice Equinox. Was it Equinox? I'm sure the one I was on before they did it. Anyway, so they started with it, but what they've done now is they put all of that on hold. So they were going to finish them all by 2022. All of the ships were going to have been through that process. It's on hold. So all of the Royal Caribbean group, so Celebrity is part of the Royal Caribbean group, they have postponed all of the upgrades. So they were upgrading lots of the Royal Caribbean ships to do those really zooty water slides and stuff on the back of the ships. That's all on hold. So other than core maintenance. So they basically put that on hold, put it on pause, and I guess we will see once cruising's up and started again, the timing for that. It's a massive investment, and of course money is very tight, so it'll be interesting to see whether they just quietly, delay that for a very long time. I haven't seen anything other than they're postponing it. Wouldn't surprise me if they do that. I had a question. I saw some question about the UK, and I think I've moved down a little bit. Let me just go back up the list. 20% okay. Suzanne has asked, we due to go to the Princess to the Caribbean in November. We're coming from the UK. Do you think we'll get there? Suzanne, I would say probably unlikely. And the reason I say that is twofold. One of which is we have to have the US opening the borders to people that they closed travelers to. So they closed it, as I think I mentioned earlier in the live stream, they have to open the borders to, they closed the borders to like China and a few other countries, but they closed it to all of the EU and the UK, Switzerland, all those places that aren't part of the EU, but are obviously in Europe. And we have to wait for those to be lifted. As we've seen, there is, in many countries, including Germany and other places, as lockdown has eased, we've seen kind of the expected kind of rise again in cases. So we have to wait and see. Certainly what I saw in the papers in the UK this week is the sort of the more travel experts they were predicting it wasn't going to happen. November, I guess, is election time in the US. So I don't know whether that has an influence on whether they want to be seen to lifting the borders before the election, after the election. I don't know if there's a political play in there. The bigger challenge, though, is will the CDC have agreed to sign off on cruises running by then? We've already seen cruise lines already, right through to September, and we don't know yet whether the CDC will approve it, and they don't seem to be moving that quickly. So I think what we're going to see in terms of you getting there, I think we're going to see, as you probably know, I think the UK is going to lift its non-essential travel thing quite soon. The 40-day quarantine coming back in, I think, is going to go quite soon. But certainly the US is not likely to be one of those air corridors they're talking about. So I think it's really risky. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I'm due to go to the US in October. And I'm not sure that's going to happen because I'm more concerned about the borders opening first than anything else. So I think that's going to be really interesting. The key thing for you, Suzanne, is, as I mentioned, the CDC, the no sail order is due to expire 24th of July. So the next 2 weeks, I think you're going to see a good sense of where that's netting out. But I think it's kind of so. If in terms of that, I would also say, hold on, wait, because obviously you need to see what's going to happen, and wait for them to cancel. Because if Princess cancel, you then have the opportunity of taking cash refund, or obviously the bonus onboard future cruise credit. Princess have gotten a lot of flack if you do take cash for being very slow at refunding. They keep issuing updates. They've put more people on it. There was an update in the last week where they've spoken about they know that they're being very slow and they're trying to get better at doing it. So I would still wait for that. Again, the big crunch comes is when you have to pay the final balance. And I'm trying to remember offhand, I need to check offhand, but I think Princess has already allowed people up to then to move with no penalty. But I would hold on and wait. I would say it's kind of so-so at the moment. People are asking, like, when people, Derek asking, when will cruise ships be coming back to the Bahamas? Again, we haven't got a specific date on that. I know the Bahamas is starting to open up, and the Bahama Cruise Line was hoping to start next month, I don't think they've yet cancelled. So that. KB's asking, did you recently or have you ever done a video on the do's and don'ts of a cruise on Symphony? I have not done recently videos about Royal Caribbean, and what's incredibly frustrating about the shutdown, KB, was I had actually booked a series of Royal Caribbean cruises because I wanted to update the stuff I'd done on Royal Caribbean because it was a bit out of date. And so I'd been on some of the newer ships, but just to see them and tour them. So I'd actually booked a series of cruises in May to do a whole lot on Royal Caribbean. So I don't have those. And until the sailing starts again, I won't do that. But my plan is to do that. So unfortunately, I don't. However, what I would recommend you take a look at, there is a great YouTube channel and blog and podcast called the Royal Caribbean Blog. And Matt, and I always forget his surname, so I apologize to Matt for his surname begins with an H, but he has fantastic information on Royal Caribbean. So the Royal Caribbean Blog, you can find him, I think it's called Royal Caribbean Blog on YouTube. He runs a lot of live sessions like this, answering questions, and he will definitely have podcasts, blogs, and videos about it. So I'd strongly recommend you take a look at that. I want to talk a little bit about travel insurance. There's a great question here from Alex and travel insurance. So Alex asks, have you seen anything from UK travel insurance companies about how they're going to word future policies with regard to COVID? It's very, very variable. And from what I've seen, this is also true in the United States, if you're based in the United States. And I've seen a couple of people contact me from Australia as well on this. But answering specifically about the UK, a couple of things have happened. One, we've seen some cruise lines some insurance companies very explicitly say they are going to include COVID-19 within their policies. So we've seen two specific examples, one of which is Saga. So Saga Cruises, which I was talking about a little bit earlier, they build travel insurance into their cruise fare. Now, you can either, if you want to opt out, you get a slight discount, but they build insurance into the fare because Saga ultimately is an insurance company. So Saga Cruises is owned by Saga, which is primarily an insurance company. And they offering insurance for any passenger, which will include COVID-19. And that's quite important because their average passenger age is quite elderly, because you'll find, although they're talking about 50s, you'll find lots of people 60s, 70s, 80s on their ships, and it's quite hard anyway to get insurance. So that's one thing we've seen very specifically for their cruises. I also saw some stuff from Stayshore where they spoke about building COVID-19 in. My own specific travel insurance company, I have an annual policy. It's been a very good annual policy. I've had it for many, many years. They insure people with medical, we have to do medical declarations at a good price. They have expressly excluded COVID-19. So that, of course, is then an issue. So it's quite a challenging one. So we're seeing a mix of policies doing it. The other challenge you've got, and I think this is true in the UK, it's less true in the United States. In the UK, a great way of finding travel insurance was using the price comparison sites. So there's a whole bunch of them, Money Supermarket and Go Compare and Compare the Market, those kind of things. They had really, really good travel insurance comparison policies, comparison engines, that's the word I'm looking for. They don't really operate anymore because it's become so complicated. So unfortunately, what you're going to have to do if you're looking for insurance is go and hunt out and express the ask. It's very, very variable. In fact, I saw something with Martin Lewis, who is the money saving expert. For those people who don't know, he created the site. He's become a personality giving money advice. And he gives lots of advice about travel insurance. He actually had one of his television shows last night, and he was talking about this challenge you've got. You really have to hunt out and find it. Now, in the US, I've seen a similar discussion. Again, I saw it on Cruise Radio podcast with Doug Parker, and one of his sponsors is actually a travel insurance company in the US, and they're more of a broker, I guess. And he was talking about, again, how some of the policies will include COVID-19, including cancellation for any reason with COVID-19. So again, you might want to you have to search for it, or there are some brokers that you could go out. And in the US, there are. So if you're in the US and not want to get an answer to Alex's question, take a look at Doug Parker's Cruise Radio podcast and look at his sponsor. I think it's called Trip Insurance pullmantur.com, if I remember correctly. So Don's asking this question: due to cruise on September the 20th from Barcelona with Royal Caribbean, doubtful it will sail, was wondering on your thoughts. Don, at this point in time, it is extremely unlikely, simply because at this point in time, Spain has banned all cruise ships with no plan or no date to review. Now, I think probably they will at some point review it, but what they had been doing across Europe is countries, when they built in these various restrictions, whether it's closing borders or states of emergency or whatever, they set renewal dates. And when they lifted the date for land-based travelers, at the time they said, look, no cruise ships can come into any Spanish port, and we have no date. We're going to renew it. So there's no date on that. The same even actually out of the UK. There's no specific date for renewing when cruise lines can start. So it's unless Spain change their mind, it's extremely unlikely. It's possible if other ports open, Royal Caribbean may schedule it, but I would say it's extremely unlikely. Now, due in September, so Royal Caribbean have cancelled cruises till the 15th of September at this point in time. Again, it'll be interesting to see what the CDC say, because if the CDC bring out, although the CDC only influences the US specifically, but it has a knock-on effect into others. So I think Europe opening for cruises in September seems unlikely, just based on what I'm seeing. Countries are opening for land-based, and I think they're going to wait and see how it goes. So it seems your big challenge is Spain. So I think it seems pretty unlikely. Suzanne confirming again, Stayshore recovering that COVID-19. So Stayshore just confirming that as well. So Vicky is asking a question. Now, this is a very topical one for me too, Vicky. We pre-booked before everything happened on a Holland America 10-day Southern Caribbean. What are your thoughts about cruising the Caribbean for January 2021? Should we wait it out or cancel? I also got a cruise in January 2021, middle of January 2021, not on Holland America, which I actually did in March, and it was fantastic. I love Holland America. I'm actually doing a celebrity cruise on Celebrity Edge because I wanted to do more about Celebrity Edge. So I have that in January, and we don't know. There's no indications yet about how far it's going to be pushed out. So I would wait it out. That's what I'm doing, to be honest with you. I booked with a relatively low deposit. I don't know if you booked with a low deposit. I have to pay January, December, November, I think about October time originally was payment. I think I'm around saying that Holland America have reduced their payment days to 60 days. I think I'm around saying so. It's even less time to pay. By that time, you'll have a much better sense of what's happening. I would just wait it out. Depending on how you booked and what your cancellation terms is, I don't think that Holland America are allowing you to book flexibly. So you would end up losing money, I think, if you were trying to move the stage. So I would wait it out and see how it goes. And you should have a better read before you have to pay the final deposit. What I'm saying to people is really, and hold on, a lot of cruise lines are then introducing their cruise with confidence, where they're pushing that. So as cruises get cancelled the next couple of months ahead, 3 or 4 months ahead, they're letting people move. The big watch out is if you're allowed to move it, it's booked under a new policy called Cruise with Confidence. And read the small print very carefully, because pretty much every cruise line that I've looked at, when you move, it expressly says in the small print that you can only get future cruise credit if you then cancel or it gets cancelled. So that becomes a big issue. So that's why I've held back, because you are perhaps giving away the ability to get a cash refund should you want cash refund and to move it elsewhere, and you're locking yourself into future cruise credit. And I got a question that reminds me. I got a question from someone on the channel where they had a cruise. They got nervous about it. They didn't want to go. So they used the cruise line's option to move without any penalty. They moved. That cruise then got cancelled, and they got future cruise credit. But they wanted cash, but they couldn't because they now are locked into future cruise credit. Once you agree to take future cruise credit, you can't then say, I want cash. So that's very important, because you've got a new deal with the cruise line. So even if you say, accept the future cruise credit, and then 3 months time you say, no, I want the cash, you find that won't happen. I got stung that way, not really thinking about it, not with the cruise lines, with the airlines, where it was really complicated when this all started, and I had loads of flights. So you went on the site and you had the option of taking a voucher, and it was, there's all these stories about waiting hours and hours to get through on the phone line. So I took the vouchers and I thought this is crazy because I want the cash, and I learned the hard way that's a new deal and you can't get that. So hopefully that was a little bit rambling. Luminta saying, my agent said Pullmantur already declared bankruptcy 7 times, so no need to worry. This is going to be very interesting. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see. What we have seen is they're stripping the ships of everything of value. Also, if you go onto a site which is called Yacht Sales, I think the name of the site, I did actually put in my video, you'll see there's some ships there which the dates of the ship were built, the capacity, the pictures look exactly like 2 of the Pullmantur ships, and they've applied for this reorganization. I think you're right, Luminita, I hope I pronounced that correctly, is under Spanish law. They've applied for reorganization, which I guess is more similar, as I read it, to Chapter 11 in the United States, which is not full liquidation. But I think we're seeing a lot of that kind of consolidation. So you may be right. What's also interesting though is if you are people who booked on Pullmantur, because all their cruises have been cancelled is they're being offered a cruise on another Royal Caribbean brand, so they can go on Royal Caribbean or Celebrity as their option. I'm going to just touch back on this one. So Pal Patel IRN or Pal Patel RN. I booked a Royal Caribbean cruise in December 2020, thinking about moving it. Should I wait to move it or cancel? Again, it depends what you want to do. I would wait for a couple of reasons. One, because as I mentioned, you're going to have more options. Do you take the money? Do you get the bonus? Because if you wait and they cancel it, you're going to get the bonus. If you move it now, assuming there's no penalties, they normally won't give you the bonus. So it's worth waiting and seeing how things stack out. Are the cruises running? Are the ports running? How do you feel? Do you feel comfortable traveling? And although there's lots of talk about restricted capacity and stuff, the cruise lines will make sure there's plenty of capacity out there for people who want to cruise. I would wait, and a few other people have jumped in and said as well. I would just wait, and I have paid in full for December conference out of Fort Lauderdale. So Hotel Boz saying paid in full on December the 5th on the Enchanted Princess for the Western Caribbean out of Fort Lauderdale. I guess you're asking what's happening. Is it going to be cancelled? But I just realized I was talking. I raced in January. It's Enchanted Princess I booked on, not the Edge. I'm doing the Edge later in the year. The reason I booked Enchanted Princess is I was supposed to be on Enchanted Princess in September, which clearly isn't going to happen because the ships didn't even come out of the shipyard yet, and with everything going on. So I'd booked to go in January rather than Celebrity Edge. I apologize if I said that wrong earlier. Again, I think it's just a waiting game. We also have to wait for the ship to come out and get into service and see how that all stacks. So I want to wrap up a little bit because we're heading up for an hour. So I just want to answer Michael and Chris Kidd. The rumor of Carnival selling 6 ships, do you know if that's a true fact, and which ones are they? Michael and Chris, they absolutely got rid of 6 ships. It's definite. They announced it as part of their update to Wall Street this week. We don't know all of them. Some people have listed ones they think we know. That one of them was a Costa ship. Some people have listed them. So there's lots of speculation. We don't know exactly what they are, but I think it was the Costa Victoria was the first one. And I'm sure in the next couple of days we'll see which ones they are. As I mentioned right at the very beginning, for those people who are on the beginning, we also know that some of these ships are being scrapped, not just sold on, they're physically being scrapped. Arnold Donald also made it very, very clear that they are going to get rid of more ships. 6 is just the beginning, and he didn't say how many there were. So they're clearly actively getting rid of ships. And I guess they're trying to focus on the very efficient ships. So one of the things I saw a while ago was Richard Fain from Royal Caribbean talking about the new ships are incredibly efficient. The old ships are less efficient. So in terms of making money, they want to have as many of the new ships as possible. So the assumption is that they'll be the older ships. But it's interesting seeing now that a 23-year-old, 24-year-old ship is now considered a very old ship, whereas that would have had a long, long time to go. So let's take a look and see. I want to pick up on this one. Jordan has said, back in September for my first cruise, so that's September last year, I guess, I booked a Royal Caribbean Baltic cruise. Baltic cruise is fantastic. I had one this year, which didn't happen, so I've moved it to next year's season. For my wife and I for June 2021. In fact, that's when I'm going, but I'm not going on Royal Caribbean. Do you think the prices will fall before our final payment becomes due? Possibly, and very likely, in my view. Now, the cruise lines are saying no, prices will, they're going to try and keep prices up. However, what I can tell you, Jordan, is one thing that you absolutely should do, because if the prices go down, you want to get the benefit of the prices going down. So set up a watch on those fares. Now, I don't know if you booked direct or whether you booked through an agent, but anyway, if you go to cruisewatch.com, put in the exact cruise that you've got, and then set up a price alert. Also have a look actually at the prices there and have a look what you compared. And if there's a big gap already, get hold of Royal Caribbean and tell them that you noticed that you can now get your cruise for cheaper if it's the same grade and all that kind of stuff, and ask them what they're going to do about it. What Royal Caribbean are doing about it is they are reducing your fare. They actually have said they will reduce their fare, and I think that's running at the moment through to April, but they will reduce your fare. They're already doing that, so they'll do that. So do that first of all, but set up an alert, and the site will alert you when prices go down, or if the grade above you comes down in price. So if you've booked, don't know what you've booked, let's assume you've booked an ocean view. If balconies come down in price close to ocean view, it also alerts you as well. So I was mentioning that cruise that I got in January on Enchanted Princess. I've got a cruise, I've got an alert. I've had 2 alerts in the last month telling me that price has gone down. Now, I haven't got hold of Princess yet to tell them that, because I figured it's gone down twice. I'm going to wait a little bit, but certainly before my final balance, probably in the next week, well, not final balance, in the next week, I'm going to get hold of Princess and say, okay, what are you going to do? Are you going to reduce my price down to that price that I've got, or are you going to give me an upgrade option or onboard credit? So prices, I think there will be softness in prices. Now, not everyone agrees with me on that, but the best way to do is set an alert. If you don't like the Cruise Watch site, Cruise Critic also does it. So again, put in your exact cruise, and you can set up a price alert, and that will alert you on what's going on. And also, DL Hagen saying, if you have a travel agent, they will watch for price decreases and get them for the clients as well. So if you've got a travel agent, it obviously takes it out of your hands as well. A question, wow, I hope I pronounce this correctly. Great name. Amawunda Ula. I'm sure you have this all the time. I apologize for being rubbish at pronouncing your name. What happens if my booking agent says I do not have a cruise credit? Meanwhile, my friend got a future cruise credit on the same ship. How do I verify this information? Well, if you've booked, well, first of all, your agent should know whether you've cancelled, or whether you've cancelled, whether the cruise has been cancelled or not cancelled. And when you cancel, when the cruise line cancels, what normally happens is they will, as default, most cruise lines as default will say, we will give you a future cruise credit. If you don't want future cruise credit, you have to apply for a cash refund. So if your cruise has been cancelled, by default, you will have future cruise credit. The other thing to do is you should have a booking reference for that cruise. So when you book the cruise, you'll have a booking reference. So one of the things you could do is, again, say to your agent, okay, can you confirm with this booking reference? I guess the other thing you could do, what I would do if I was you, with that booking reference, I would contact that cruise line and say, look, I had this booking reference, ABCD, for whatever it was, cruise is canceled. Can you confirm that I have future cruise credit? Now, some cruise lines are starting to enable you to see that when you log into your account, your cruise personalizer accounts. Offhand, I can't remember which ones they are, because I know some of them that I had, they don't have that yet. So you can do it that way. So hopefully that helps. But certainly, if you've got a cruise cancelled and you've got that reference. So thanks very much for all of the many comments and questions that we've got coming through. It's like Casey talking about private islands we think are going to be used, and I think we've seen lots of hints for that. Again, asking lots of questions. Michael asking about cruises in October, the chances of going ahead, it's starting to look really so. I mean, I think Princess is cancelled to the end of September, so it's starting to look very, very tight. Again, I think we will get much more sense in the next 2 to 3 weeks on many of these questions, because the CDC are going to have to come off the fence on those. So thanks for those people who've joined me on the live stream. Thanks for these incredible questions. I'll make sure I take a look at the questions and try and make sure I build them in next time. Remember, I have a video coming out on Sunday. If you haven't watched one of those videos, it's about the best cruise lines for people over 40. I need to take that. Sorry, I put that comment on there. So take a look at that on Sunday. Of course, I have loads and loads of videos. If you want to watch this again, what I do is this live stream will be live for a week on the channel. I do put little chapters in so you can jump ahead and revisit or look at those various questions. Thanks very much for joining it. Have a great weekend, and hopefully we have even better news than I had this week about cruising. Take care, and I was going to say happy sailing, but you haven't do that. Happy weekend.